It started innocently enough. I was sitting at my desk in my modest one-bedroom apartment, poring over design specifications for a precision mechanism my team was developing. As an engineer, I felt an electric thrill each time I worked on solutions that required both creative design and analytical rigor. My phone buzzed, the screen showing my mother's name. I hesitated. Her calls rarely meant an exchange of pleasantries. Still, I answered. Within minutes, I felt as though the rug had been pulled from under my feet. She demanded I quit my job. Completely. Her tone was calm, almost deceptively so. She simply stated I needed to step away from the job I had dreamed of since college and devote all my time to caring for my sister's children. My sister, she reminded me, was divorced and had limited help from her ex-husband. She's got so much responsibility, Mother declared. You have no children of your own, so you must find a way to support her. After all, we raised you to respect your elders, and she's 4 years older than you. I blinked in disbelief. Respect is one thing, but walking away from the career I'd built? I had worked hard to become an engineer. That was my passion, and it was yielding promising possibilities. I was also being paid a reasonable salary, albeit nowhere near what my sister brought home each month. Oddly enough, my sister was not a high-powered executive at some major firm. She was a cashier in a furniture store owned by my father. Let the store be called Comfort Interiors for the sake of the story. She worked fewer hours than I did, at least 20 hours fewer a week, and yet somehow earned nearly twice my income. I had never fully grasped how such an arrangement was possible, but father had always favored her, so I assumed he gave her some special pay structure to maintain her loyalty and her livelihood. Nevertheless, I had never envied her. I loved engineering, and I was proud of what I did. I never measured my success by how many zeros appeared in my bank account, but the request, or rather the demand, that I abandon my job to babysit my sister's children was too jarring to accept calmly. Without thinking, I laughed incredulously. That laughter, it turned out, only ignited Mother's anger. "Have some respect," she snapped. "You shouldn't laugh at your sister's situation. She's older than you, and you must honor your elders. She's struggling. She's alone. You're still unattached, with no children, and you should be spending more time with your nephews and contributing to their upbringing." Her words stung, not merely because they were unfair, but because of how deeply she disregarded my own situation. I was putting in 60 hours a week in my engineering job, possibly more in busy cycles. My sister, by contrast, was working maybe 40 hours a week, sometimes even less, and yet I was the one being told to sacrifice everything for her. It was impossible to stifle my frustration. "You're asking me to give up my entire career? That's not just a small favor," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Besides, I'm already giving them free housing. Isn't that enough? I barely see them, and I've never tried to collect rent or anything." I hoped she would remember that particular fact, that I had let my sister live in my apartment, which I inherited from my grandfather a couple of years ago. I was the owner, but I had not asked her to pay me a penny. The arrangement was that she could stay there as long as she needed, and I would return to live there myself whenever I was ready. Since I was living in a different part of the city, closer to my job anyway, she had become quite comfortable in that apartment with her 2 children. She had needed a place, especially after her divorce. I had no problem accommodating them, as I truly wanted to help. I felt sympathy for my nephews, and it was never my intention for them to feel unsafe or unstable. But Mother didn't seem to think that was enough. "It's time you contribute more meaningfully to your family," she said. "It's not only about providing a roof. You must spend time with your nephews if you claim to care about them so much." I could feel my jaw tightening. And I guess my sister's father, my father, doesn't count as family when it comes to supporting her? Or maybe her ex-husband is completely out of the picture? I don't see either of them babysitting. Silence fell on the other end. Then she said in a tone that implied finality, "She needs you more than you realize. And you know that your father is not going to step in on babysitting duties. You need to do this for her, or the children will have no real future." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone in shock. uncertain whether to laugh or to be furious. The entire conversation was surreal. Did my mother actually expect me to give up my dreams, my sole livelihood, just to watch over my sister's kids? Yes, I cared about my nephews, but shouldn't my sister be asked to reorganize her priorities before I'm asked to make drastic sacrifices? My heart pounded, a wave of memories flooding me. My family had always been complicated. Growing up, I was often a side character in my own household. My sister basked in an endless supply of compliments from our parents, particularly from our father. Whenever she needed something, father found a way to provide it. If she wanted a new phone, he would ask me to hand over mine just for a short while, but somehow she ended up keeping it. When we were teenagers, I wanted to attend a robotics camp, but father insisted we didn't have the budget for it. A few months later, my sister was given a generous allowance to travel with friends to a ski resort. Over the years, these imbalances didn't fade. They remained a constant, an unspoken rule that in any conflict or need, sister's comfort came first. I never saw it as a personal tragedy, though. Instead, I poured my energy into my studies. A high GPA got me into a solid engineering program. I worked part-time jobs to sustain myself while at university, rarely asking anything from home. I found mentors, made friends in my field, and discovered a passion for advanced mechanical design. My dream job was to contribute to projects that made life more efficient. Maybe design something that would help folks with daily tasks or even be part of a cutting-edge technological breakthrough. After graduation, I was ecstatic to find a position that aligned with my aspirations. My sister, by contrast, stayed around our hometown. Eventually, father hired her as a cashier at Comfort Interiors, but cashier was just the official job title. In practice, she did far less work than an average retail employee. Father ensured she had a comfortable desk in a back office, let her set her own hours, and paid her a sum that was scandalously high for what she did. I had no envy, truly. I simply found it bizarre that someone with her role earned significantly more than me. I accepted it as family politics, the kind of nepotism you see in certain family-run businesses. Things changed when she got married. At first, everyone believed she had found a partner who could support her lifestyle, but it wasn't long before the relationship soured. Her husband left, refusing most contact with the children. He contributed almost nothing in terms of emotional or financial support. That was the moment I decided to help more than ever. When I inherited my grandfather's old apartment, I told my sister she could live there rent-free for as long as it suited her. She needed a stable roof for her kids, and I wanted to do my part. My gesture was meant to ease her life, not to open the door to demands that I must give up my own. In the weeks following my conversation with mother, the tension simmered. I chose not to call her back immediately, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she pushed the topic again. Sure enough, during a family gathering that I almost skipped, she confronted me in person. My sister was there too, standing by mother's side like they were a team against me. They repeated the same arguments, that I was younger, that I had no children, that I was being selfish by not helping with the nephews more often. My sister watched me with narrowed eyes as though suspecting I might sabotage her. I tried reason. I'm not refusing to help. I just can't quit my job. If there are specific hours you need assistance, I can check my schedule. Or even better, we can look for a professional babysitter or a daycare. My sister scoffed. We can't afford a sitter, she replied, and besides, that's impersonal. Kids need family around them. They need the kind of family love only a blood relative can provide. I found it ironic. She was complaining about not affording a sitter while making almost twice my salary. I wanted to say it, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want an all-out confrontation in the middle of a family event. However, my mother noticed my stony expression. Don't judge your sister, she snapped. She's a single mom. She's worked hard to get to where she is. You should be grateful for the advantages you had. Grateful for what? I wondered. The favoritism that overshadowed me? The constant belittling of my work because it wasn't as lucrative as my sister's arrangement? I decided not to argue, but my heart was seething. When the meal ended, I made a hasty escape. At home, I spent hours pacing the floor, wondering how it had come to this. The injustice was suffocating. The more I thought about it, the more I fumed. One evening, my phone buzzed again and my father's name appeared. Dread spread through me. I had been expecting the next call to be from my mother, but apparently they had decided to switch tactics. With a shaking hand, I answered. Father's voice was calm, paternal even, but laced with that same sense of authority I had grown used to. He talked about the difficulty of rearing children, how tight finances could become. He expressed concern that my sister might fold under the pressures of single motherhood. Then, gently, he suggested I temporarily step away from my engineering position, just for a year or two, supposedly, so that I could help out in a more hands-on manner. You can always pick up your career later, he promised. I was appalled. Father, you know how competitive my field is. Leaving now would disrupt my entire career path. There's no guarantee I could just hop back in where I left off, he sighed. Don't be so dramatic. Your sister needs you. You're still young. Jobs come and go, but family is forever. He carried on with a litany of how supportive families function, how we all need to band together. He even tried to claim that by babysitting, I'd be fulfilling my moral duty. My head spun with each word he spoke. Was it so easy for him to discount everything I'd done to support my sister, including letting her live in my own apartment? Was the free housing not enough? As he rambled on, I caught a faint underlying tone, something more than a father's coaxing. There was a hint of threat. Or maybe it was just me reading between the lines, but I recalled past occasions when father used subtle intimidation to get me to comply with family demands. No one in the family had ever asked for my perspective or respected my boundaries. That phone call had the same flavor, like a subtle warning. If I didn't comply, there would be consequences. The next morning, my mother called me again, refusing even a shred of small talk. She pushed me to announce my resignation immediately. Your sister has a big project at the store next month, and she'll be extremely busy. She needs you to watch the kids while she's at work, Mother said, as if reading from a prepared script. What about father? Can he reduce some of her hours since he's the owner? I suggested. To that, she gave me the same old argument. Don't be inconsiderate. Your father is doing everything he can for your sister. It's your turn to do your part. We raised you to put family first. I pressed the phone so hard to my ear that it started to hurt. I already let them live in my apartment. I'm paying the mortgage, the taxes, and the maintenance. My sister doesn't contribute a dime. How is that not helping? You keep bringing up that apartment, Mother said dismissively. But remember, your sister has no other place to go. You're not doing her a favor. You're merely fulfilling your family duty. She hung up, leaving me speechless. My duty? Could she truly be that blind to everything I was already doing? Something inside me snapped that day. From that point on, I realized this was more than just misguided family love. This was exploitation, and I was done playing along. I called a lawyer friend to inquire about my rights as a property owner and how I might proceed if one day I needed my apartment back. The answer was straightforward. I was fully within my rights to ask my sister to vacate, especially since we had no formal lease. She had no legal claim to that property, but I wasn't sure if I was prepared to take such a drastic step. Evicting my own sister with her children seemed cruel. Yet the more I thought about it, the more I saw how my mother and father were twisting my kindness against me. They showed zero gratitude for the fact that my sister's entire family lived under my roof. Instead, they wanted to go a step further by forcing me to give up my livelihood and become a live-in babysitter. The injustice was galling. I resolved to stand my ground. I would not yield to their demands. I had every right to keep working at the career I loved. A week later, the next blow arrived. I was pulled aside at work by my supervisor, who seemed agitated. There's been a strange phone call, he said hesitantly. It was from someone claiming to be a family member. He insisted you'd be leaving your position soon due to a family emergency. He even asked if we could let you go earlier to ensure you don't have any pending obligations here. I found it odd. Are you resigning? My blood turned to ice. I had no doubt who had made that call. Father. That subtle threat I'd sensed in his phone call was no figment of my imagination. He'd gone behind my back, trying to sabotage my job by telling my employer I'd be leaving. I could feel a mixture of fury and humiliation. With forced composure, I explained to my supervisor that there was a misunderstanding, that I absolutely had no intention of quitting. He gave me a worried look, but accepted my explanation. Once I left the meeting, I stormed outside, hands shaking. The betrayal felt like a knife in my back. It wasn't enough that my parents demanded I quit. They had taken steps to ensure I'd be removed from my job one way or another. This was a new low. I decided in that moment that if betrayal was their game, I would respond decisively. I would not, under any circumstances, sit idly while they tried to destroy what I'd worked for. That evening, I spent hours weighing my options. I loathed the idea of displacing my nephews. After all, they were innocent. They had no control over the manipulations of the adults in their lives. But my mother and father had gone too far, and my sister was playing right along with them. I had to defend my own life and career. I contacted my lawyer friend again and had a lengthier talk about the steps necessary to reclaim my apartment. He advised me to give a formal notice, probably a month or two, for my sister to vacate. He suggested that I consider offering financial help for a relocation if I wanted to remain somewhat humane. However, I didn't feel I owed her that. She was earning nearly twice my salary. She could easily secure a small place of her own if she really wanted to. She just didn't want to spend her money on rent, and father was clearly not encouraging her to do so. The next day, I called my mother, ensuring the call was recorded, my friend's suggestion. I calmly informed her that I would no longer permit my sister to live in my apartment free of charge. I would be sending a notice for her to leave in 60 days. After that, if she refused, I would proceed with legal eviction. My mother, predictably, went ballistic, insulting me and claiming I was destroying the family. I didn't fight back with words. I just made it clear that this was the direct result of their attempt to sabotage my job. An hour later, my father called furious. He labeled me ungrateful and threatened that I would be cut off from any inheritance or support. This made me laugh bitterly. Did he think I relied on him for anything? My entire education and career had been funded by my own hard work and scholarships. I never took anything from him that I couldn't do without. The only real gift I had received from the family was grandfather's apartment, and that inheritance came without strings attached. I listened to my father's threats, each one more insulting than the last. He even said something like, "Once you're fired, don't come crying to us." That sealed the deal. They had no remorse, no second thoughts about trying to get me fired. I responded with a single sentence, "I'm done letting you bully me." Then I hung up. I was exhausted, and yet a part of me felt strangely liberated. Word must have reached my sister in the next few minutes because she sent me a string of frantic messages. She insisted she had nothing to do with the phone call to my supervisor, that she had never intended for me to lose my job. She claimed it was all our father's idea, that he just wanted to keep the family together by pushing me to do the right thing. She asked me not to evict her for the sake of the children, and I found myself torn. My nephews were innocent, yet the entire fiasco had come about precisely because I had been too lenient. I wrote back, carefully explaining that her living situation was contingent upon basic respect for my boundaries and my life decisions. The sabotage of my job was simply the last straw. She responded with more pleas, but I stood firm. My message was clear. She had 2 months to find a new place. In those following weeks, the full force of my mother's and father's anger descended on me. Extended family members started calling, chastising me for the heartless act of kicking out a single mom. Rumors circulated that I was trying to extort money from my sister by charging her rent she couldn't afford. The narrative was twisted to make me appear greedy and unfeeling, but those who knew me, and there were a few, recognized I had done more for my sister than even her own ex-husband. I maintained my composure, grateful that at least my position at work seemed secure. My supervisor was on my side. Despite the swirl of drama at home, I threw myself into my engineering projects, often staying late at the office, trying to distance my mind from the conflict. Halfway into the 60-day notice period, I discovered something else. My sister had the means to move all along. A mutual friend mentioned in passing that she had nearly triple the savings I did. She'd bragged about stashing money away in a high-interest account, so that if father ever cut off her lavish paycheck, she'd still be fine for a good while. I stared at my friend, stunned. My sister had made me feel guilty about evicting her, all while sitting on a substantial amount of money. She could have put a down payment on a condo or a small house, but she preferred living in my grandfather's apartment free of charge. I felt my anger and a certain sense of betrayal flare anew. It wasn't only my parents. My sister herself had been complicit, playing the victim to keep benefiting from free housing and near zero expenses. This realization hardened my resolve. My mother's phone calls became more frequent and more desperate, but each time I reminded her that none of this would be happening if they had respected my boundaries. I refused to give in. When the 60 days ended, my sister moved out, though not quietly. On the last day, she left the apartment in disarray with dirty walls, scratches on the floor, and a kitchen full of greasy dishes. It took me days of cleaning to restore it to livable condition. As I scrubbed and painted, I was fuming. That had been an act of spite, pure and simple. There was no reason to inflict that damage except to make my life harder. Any lingering sympathy I might have had for her plight evaporated in those moments. If there had been a betrayal, it was now mutual and almost never forgiven, as far as I was concerned. I changed the locks and had a moment of reflection in the silence of the now empty apartment. Despite the cold echo of the bare walls, I felt a strange relief. The space was mine again. I had always intended for it to be my own home eventually, but the family dynamic had complicated that. Now there was a sense of finality. Predictably, my mother and father didn't stop. I heard through relatives that they were boycotting me for my cruel actions. They threatened to spread rumors that I had lost my sense of family. They attempted, through an acquaintance, to warn my engineering firm again that I was unstable. This time, my supervisor brushed it off completely and even warned me in private that if my family persisted in harassment, I might consider legal action. I told him I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Ironically, it was my father who finally tasted some consequences beyond losing the apartment for my sister. His attempts to meddle in my career made me realize I was not the only victim of his unscrupulous methods. Apparently, a former employee at Comfort Interiors had already taken him to court for questionable pay practices. With the increased tension in our own family saga, and with my father lashing out openly, more attention fell on him. Auditors were eventually called in to examine Comfort Interiors' books, and from what I heard, they discovered how he channeled money to certain favored employees, my sister among them, and engaged in borderline tax evasion. Father faced heavy financial penalties, and his business's reputation took a hit. The nepotism that had once made my sister's life easy was now a glaring liability. That was not a chain of events I orchestrated, but it felt like poetic justice, a result of the same arrogance that led him to meddle in my affairs. Actions had consequences, and the father who had taken me for granted was now paying the price. My sister, on the other hand, discovered that being favored by our father meant she became a subject of interest in the investigation too. Although she didn't face legal repercussions herself, she had to find a new job after Comfort Interiors took a sharp financial downturn. Her days of easy money were gone. She ended up scrambling to make ends meet, ironically in the same predicament she had always accused me of neglecting. When distant relatives asked if I would help her again, I merely shrugged. I had done more than enough. She had betrayed me, never apologized, and left my property in a shambles. There was no forgiveness left in me for someone who had so blatantly used my kindness and tried to ruin my livelihood. As for my mother, she continued to call me from time to time, especially after the storm of the business investigation. I tried to keep the conversations civil, but they mostly ended with her blaming me for not supporting the family. She claimed I had cost my father everything. I was stunned by how twisted her logic was. Father had practically tried to sabotage my career. My sister had lied and taken advantage of me, but to my mother, I was still the ungrateful child who had turned my back on them. Eventually, I stopped accepting her calls. I felt no satisfaction in the silence that followed, but I did feel relief. The burden of their disapproval, a burden I had carried for most of my life, began to lift. In the months that followed, I poured my energy into my engineering projects. I found new enjoyment in my career once the looming threats from my father were gone. My supervisor, who became a quiet ally in the ordeal, included me in exciting assignments that involved travel and collaboration with innovative teams. For the first time, I truly believed in my own worth, free from my parents' manipulative overshadowing. When I finally decided to move into my grandfather's apartment, my rightful home, I entered it with a renewed sense of purpose. The floors were spotless after my previous cleaning efforts, and the walls now bore fresh coats of neutral paint. Standing in what used to be my sister's bedroom, I felt echoes of the betrayal, the arguments, the heartbreak that had unfolded, but I also felt triumph, because I had finally reclaimed not just my space, but my own autonomy. On a sunny afternoon, I turned the apartment's small balcony into a peaceful nook where I could sip coffee after work and plan my next steps in life. My thoughts drifted to the painful events of the past year. All the manipulations, the betrayals, the heartbreak, they had crushed any illusions I had about unconditional family support. But paradoxically, they had also strengthened my resolve to protect my interests. I understood now that family was not a single, unbreakable chain if one side constantly sought to exploit the other. My sister never really apologized or owned up to her actions. Father suffered the blow of financial penalties, and though I heard rumors that he was trying to rebuild, I didn't bother to contact him. From time to time, extended relatives would show up at my door or call, urging me to make peace with my parents. They repeated variations of what my mother had said. Family is forever. But to me, forgiveness is earned, not demanded. Betrayal had severed the already fragile ties between us. If they wanted me to be part of the family again, they would have to acknowledge the wrong they had done and actually make amends. But that seemed unlikely, given the arrogance I knew too well. So I remained steadfast in my decision, feeling not guilt, but calm certainty that my boundaries were reasonable. By setting those boundaries, I discovered something vital about myself. I valued my life's work, my dreams, and my self-respect enough to fight for them. I had the power to close a door on a toxic dynamic, and that power gave me a sense of independence I had never fully tasted before. Yes, it came at a cost, and it hurt to realize that my own parents could stoop to such manipulations, but it also freed me from being the silent bystander, forever trapped in my sister's shadow. I took a moment to recall the exact words that triggered this shift. My mother demanding I quit my job to babysit, ridiculing my protests, telling me I should respect my elders. The memory made me shudder, but it also reminded me that I would never let that happen again. Respect is a two-way street, and there was no respect shown toward my life, my time, or my own aspirations. Shortly after, an acquaintance asked me if I regretted any part of how I handled things. Did I harbor guilt for evicting my sister, for standing my ground so firmly that my family bonds were essentially severed? I paused to reflect. There were always going to be what-ifs. I worried about my nephews, who lost a free, stable apartment, but it was their mother and grandparents who put them in that predicament by not respecting boundaries, by pushing me past the limit of tolerance. Ultimately, every act of betrayal invites consequences. If someone repeatedly hurts you, expecting no pushback, they eventually learn that your silence is not infinite. I refused to remain complicit in my own exploitation, and so life carried on. My days filled with design meetings, blueprint reviews, test rig assemblies, and the thousand micro challenges of engineering that I found exhilarating. I derived so much satisfaction from seeing my ideas take shape in real prototypes that I almost forgot how close I had come to losing it all. On weekends, I made time for friends who supported me throughout the turmoil. Some had worried I would carry guilt over the family fallout, but I felt more relief than regret. I learned that a dream job is more than just a paycheck. It's a tangible piece of one's identity and passion. To discard it because of someone else's manipulative sense of entitlement would have destroyed a part of my spirit. Months later, on a quiet evening, I found myself sitting on my balcony, gazing at the city lights. A warm breeze carried faint sounds of traffic from below. I breathed in the moment, reflecting on how I had regained control of my life, my home, my job, my dreams. They were intact. The people who tried to take them from me had each received their fair share of consequences. My parents lost their influence over me, and my father's questionable activities at Comfort Interiors caught up to him. My sister was forced to find a more realistic job after father's store floundered, and she had to start paying for her own place. No one escaped accountability. I will not say I took pleasure in their hardships, but I can't deny feeling a sense of justice that the individuals who tried to coerce me into sacrificing my life for theirs faced the repercussions of their own actions. Betrayal is rarely forgiven in my world now. And as I sat there, sipping coffee, I let that final truth settle within me. The life I protected was worth every moment of conflict, every confrontation, and every severed tie, because sometimes we have to stand alone to be truly free. The phone remains silent most nights. My mother no longer calls, nor does my father. My sister once sent a terse text about a school fundraiser for her children, but it was more informational than friendly. No apology, no attempt at reconciliation. I responded politely, contributed a small donation directly to the school, and left it at that. In another time, I might have reached out to salvage the bond, but not now. The scars remain, and forgiveness, if ever it comes, must be earned by genuine remorse and meaningful change. Without that, I stand where I do, unyielding. This is my life, my dream, my passion. I have earned every bit of it through sweat and perseverance, and I won't allow anyone, even family, to snatch it away, be it through guilt, demands, or stealthy interference. I've seen the depths to which they can sink. I've seen the true shape of their intentions, and I have built a wall of self-respect that stands firm against their manipulations. Let them call me ungrateful or heartless. I know what I am. Someone who refused to let a broken family dynamic consume my future. I linger on the balcony a while longer, letting the city lights flicker like hopeful beacons in the distance. In those small, bright points, I see the promise of my life unchained from familial tyranny, my engineering career forging ahead, my ideas taking shape, and a personal world where respect is mutual or not at all. And that realization is more comforting than anything my family ever gave me.